Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be pulling the engine out of a 2015 single cab Silverado. This thing's getting a set of BTR forged drop-in pistons from Wiseco. It's getting a stage 3 Gen 5 truck cam. It's getting a set of ported heads put on it. We're doing the new Gen 5 truck intake from BTR, the BTR cold air intake, long tube headers from Speed Engineering, a Y pipe, and a Black Widow exhaust muffler. And we're also installing a Circle D stall converter to go along with all of that. We're really excited to get into this build. It's going to be a fun little truck when it's done, and it's going to be pretty nice when we pop the hood. Our first step on this is we're going to be getting this 5.3 out. Truck doesn't have a ton of miles on it. If I remember right, it's around 80,000 or so, 90,000, somewhere in there. But we're going to get this 5.3 pulled out, get the top end of it tore down, get his pistons put in. We are doing new connecting rod bearings and bolts. We're going to get this thing back together. We're still waiting on the heads to come back from GPI. We're going to go ahead and get it out, get it on a stand, get it tore down, get the bottom end work done. And when the heads show up, we'll work on getting the cam and all that put together and everything put in, and get this thing put back together. Now, Sammy already started pulling this thing on Friday. It's Monday now, so we're going to work on getting it out the rest of the way today and try to get it on a stand if we have one open, which we do. And from there, the fun will begin. So let's dig into it and see what we can come up with. Alright guys, so it's been a couple weeks. We've been waiting on a couple things to come in. We were waiting on the cylinder heads for this thing to come back from GPI. We got those back. They've been ported. We're good to go there. We've got to get this thing tore down, get the cylinder heads off of it, put his fuel injectors and fuel rails out of it, his fuel pump, and get the heads off, get the rods and pistons out of it, get it ready to get a new set of rings and connecting rod bearings. We're going to leave the crankshaft in it. We're just going to drop these pistons in. This isn't really typically something we would do, but this engine doesn't have a lot of miles on it, and these are direct drop-in pistons for this engine bore. So that's what we're going to do. Of course, this thing had no issues, no mechanical issues whatsoever. It was a perfectly fine running truck. It's just in for some goodies. So we're going to dive into this, get this thing tore down and ready to put back together.
This is the way I pray. Heaven just isn't hard enough. Burn me alive inside. Living my life's not hard enough.
So we got the pistons and rods knocked out of this thing, got it cleaned up. Now we just got to get the pistons off the rods, get the rods cleaned up, start getting this stuff ready to go back together. But block cleaned up pretty good. Cylinder walls look great. We're excited to see what this thing does, sounds like, how it runs. All right, so we got the connecting rods off the pistons. We ran them through the ultrasonic cleaner, got them cleaned up. We did keep them numbered though, just to be safe. Might need to renumber a few of these, but we've kept them in order so far. Now from here, we're going to change. We're going to put the bearings in these things, blueprint all our clearances on the rods, and then we're going to get these things on the pistons, try to get them in the engine. So now we're knocking the old connecting rod bolts out, because we do have new replacements. These are a torque to yield bolt, so anytime you take a rod cap off, you need to replace these. So we're knocking those out. We've got a socket as our receiver, and then we just knock them out with a little extension. Doesn't take a lot, will come right out. And then we've got our rod bearings that we can use and make sure all our clearances are right.
This is the way I pray. Heaven just isn't hard enough. Burn me alive inside. Living my life's not hard enough. Take everything away. Ah!
So we've got a connecting rod clamped in the vise so we can tighten our bolts down and torque them to spec. That way we can measure the inside diameter with the bearing in, and then we'll mic the crank. Alright guys, so we got our connecting rods off the pistons, we got them cleaned, we got new bearings in them, we got new bolts in them, we've got them torqued to spec and ready to measure. But before we measure those, we're going to go ahead and measure the journals on the crankshaft and document our measurements. That way, even though we have the rods pre-numbered, if we can move some rods around to make clearances better and match up a little better, then we can always wipe the paint pen off and renumber the rods accordingly. So we're going to measure the crankshaft first. As y'all saw, we had 2 torque wrenches when we were torquing the rods down. We had one set at the first pass torque spec, and then we had one set at the second pass torque spec. Just makes it a lot more fluid and easier than having to reset the torque wrench every time you got a rod clamped down, or clamp down every rod multiple times. In case you were wondering why we were using 2 different torque wrenches, that's why. So let's dive into this thing and mic the crank and the rod journals on the crank and see what kind of measurements we end up with. All right, so now that we've taken our micrometer and we've measured our crankshaft journals, we're going to take a dial bore gauge that's set up for the inside of the connecting rod, and we're actually going to set it at 0. That way, when we measure our connecting rod, whatever this gauge reads is how much clearance we actually have. So it takes some of the math out of it for us. So we got all our clearances checked. Now we're getting ready to put the pistons on the rods. There's a couple things you want to look out for. You notice BTR engraved an arrow that says forward, so that arrow needs to face the front of the engine. On the connecting rods, we have a blank side or a little ridge. This spot faces the back of the motor, so the opposite of the forward arrow. Very important to get that right. And now we're going to open up our wrist pins and our new clips. We've already got one set ready. And we're going to get these things pressed on here. So first things first, we are going to install a clip in one side of the piston to receive the wrist pin as it comes through. Now, these things can be a little tricky. The idea though is get one side of your clip in, and then you slowly walk it around until you get to this side. It doesn't take a lot of force, just some finesse. And make sure it's locked in that groove good. Now that one's ready for a connecting rod. Alright, so we're going to call this cylinder 1. So that means that I have the wrong pistons out. Alright, so we're going to call this cylinder 2. The reason we're starting with the even side is because the pistons I got out, the 4 pistons that I got out laid out here, the arrow faces the front of the block, so that's obviously going to be the passenger side of the engine. Like I said, you want to make sure your dimple goes the opposite towards the back of the block. So we're going to leave the arrow facing that way. We're just going to rotate the piston, set it down. Dimple needs to face that way. Let's go ahead and pre-lube this thing a little bit. So slide that in there like that so we can get the rod in there. Push it all the way through. Now we're ready for a clip on this end. Now we're going to work on getting this last clip on this side of this thing. Ooh, went in good. There we go. And then you should have full floater action here. So there's cylinder 2 done. Now we just got to get the rings on that bad boy. We got the rods and pistons put together for this thing. We still got to get the rings on the pistons. We're about to get those put on now and go ahead and get these knocked back in the engine. We are working on the weekend trying to get this thing back together. But we got to make a trip up to Missouri to drop some engines off and pick a couple up tomorrow. So we're going to be out of pocket for that. But we've got a BTR Stage 3 cam, the new Gen 5 BTR truck intake with the long runners. We've got their new plastic cold air intake tube with the BTR logo embossed on it, and we've got some exhaust and headers to go on this thing. We've also got a stall converter from Circle D. We sent a set of heads down to GPI in Jacksonville, Arkansas to have them CNC ported. So we've got to get the valve springs back on those things, or actually the new valve springs installed on those things. Valves are in them, the bottoms are taped up for now. We got to get those put back together before we can get the top end back on this thing. So right now we're going to work on getting the rotating assembly done, so we've got a short block, and then we can keep building up from there. So if you're using the MAHLE rings, they're going to send you an instruction manual like this, and you have to look down the piston ring. This is the top side. You have to look down this ring and identify and figure out which one you have. In our case, this is going to be the top rings. This is going to be our second rings, and then there's our oiling rings. All right, so as you can tell, these have the MAHLE logo etched into the top side of one ring. And then we've got a dimple on this side. And that shows you that's the top side of the ring. Always start with your bottom rings, which are your oiling rings. This ring's got to go in first in order for these rings to actually seat down into place and sit like they're supposed to, because they have a step on the inside. So we start with these. Then we get our 2 small oiling rings on, one on the top, one on the bottom. Then we do our second ring and our first ring. Now ring orientation is important too. I like to put the split of my first oiling ring at 12 o'clock. Remember, we got our arrow on these showing BTR logo. So find the BTR logo. We'll go about 12 o'clock. And then on a stock style piston, you're going to have a little oil outlet right here in the corners of the pistons. That's usually about 11 and 1 o'clock. That's usually about where we put our second ring. And put it on there like that. We'll do the other one at the opposite. So we did that one at 1. We'll do this one at 11. Alright, so now those are on there. These are little piston pliers for this one. Piston ring pliers. Now I like to set these at either 3 or 9 o'clock, and then we're going to set the top ring to the opposite. So we're going to set this one at 9. And a lot of the times, instead of using the piston pliers on the top ring, you stick it in the groove perpendicular, swing it around, and then just slowly work that ring down. Doesn't work so well on the second ring because you fight this groove on the top ring, but if you're doing the top ring, that works well. So we're gonna get the rest of these put together, and then we'll start getting them ready to put in the motor. All right, so we got all the rings on the pistons. We got them oriented the way they need to be. We got our torque wrenches out to keep it from having to switch back and forth the tools a lot. We put an 11 millimeter on an electric ratchet to cinch them down. We've got a 3/8 torque wrench set up to do our 15 foot-pound pass with an 11 mil socket on it. And then we've got a 1/2 inch drive torque wrench set up to do an 85-degree pass with an 11 mil socket on it. Then we've got our BTR stock 5.3 bore 3.780 piston ring compressor tool. If you need one of those, you can find them on our website, 727motorsports.net.
Evil I breed will level you completely. Bring to life everything that you fear. Live in the dark and the world is threatening. Let me enlighten you. This is the way I pray. Living just isn't hard enough. Burn me alive inside.
All right, guys, so that's going to wrap it up for this episode. We're not trying to make them super long. We're going to try to keep them short and simple, but at the same time, we're trying to be in depth with it. So we're going to break it into multiple parts for this series, essentially turn this build into a series. Then we're going to break it into multiple parts for this series. We got it out of the truck. We got it tore down. We got the rods cleaned. All our new bearing clearances checked. We got the pistons put on the rods, new rings put on the pistons. And we got those in the block. So we have a short block here. In the next episode, we'll work on getting the cam in, getting our lifters on, getting our springs put on our ported heads from GPI, get those things on this thing, get it in a long block form, see how close we can get to installing this thing in the truck. There probably will be a third part to the series because we've got the intake, the exhaust, the headers, all that stuff to add on as well. So we'll probably sum up the second episode in completing the engine assembly and getting it ready to go in the truck. Remember to find us on social media, Facebook and TikTok at 727 Motorsports. Smash that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments if you like the content. We appreciate everybody watching, everybody that likes and comments and shares with their friends. If you have any questions about an LS or LT build that you're working on, you can find the Contact Us page at our website, which is 727motorsports.net. Until next time, thank you guys.